Every Word readers, congratulations on completing week 1 of your reading. I wanted to do just a short review on the 2 books that we read just to help us keep our eye on the big story of the Bible. We started our reading this week with Genesis and one of the most important statements in the Bible, in the beginning, God. We learn who and what was created, not necessarily how and why. As God creates, we see his goodness in all of creation. The world is just teeming with life and vibrancy and goodness. On the 6th day, God created man and woman. They had a special place in creation. They were the only part of creation that were created in his image. And they were to act as royal representatives in this beautiful garden kingdom that God had created. They were to expand the goodness of Eden to take it to the whole world. Shortly after this beautiful story begins, an opposer, Satan, enters the picture, and he questions God's goodness and character to Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve choose to act as God in their own lives, looking for life where there is no life, and disobey God's good word. Sin enters the world and everything is broken. Before God ushers Adam and Eve out of the garden so they won't live in a state of sinfulness forever, he makes a good and gracious promise to them that he will send an offspring of the woman to crush this opposer. We know that to be Jesus. So right here at the beginning, we get a little hint that Jesus will eventually come. Well, from chapter 4 through 11, we see what life is like in a sinful world, and it is a downward spiral. We see the story of Cain and Abel. We see the flood with all the wickedness in the world, and then eventually we get to Babel, where the people have come together to make a name for themselves, where really their purpose was to make a name for God. In chapter 12, the narrative shifts, and God's heart to bless the nations is seen through a promise he makes to one man, Abraham. He says, through your descendants, I'm going to send one to bless the whole world. He promises Abraham that he will make his descendants as numerous as the stars. He will give them a promised land. Kings will come from him, and the whole world will be blessed. So God's original design and desire to bless the whole world is still here in his promise to Abraham. The rest of Genesis, we follow Abraham and his descendants, his son Isaac, then Isaac's son Jacob, and then Jacob's 12 sons, who will eventually become the 12 tribes of Israel. In this story, in this narrative, we do not see a good Christian family. We see polygamy, we see idolatry, we see rape and jealousy and all kinds of things. But at every point of man's failure, we see God's goodness and grace being faithful to his promise to bless the whole world. The last several chapters of the book of Genesis shift to Jacob's youngest son, Joseph, when he is sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Through this story, the 12 sons of Israel are preserved because Joseph, being sold into slavery through a miraculous series of events, was elevated to second in power, and through his leadership, the brothers were saved during a great famine. And the story comes to close with Abraham is not a great nation. His descendants are not a great nation. There's only about 70 of them. They are not living in the land that God promised them. They are living in Egypt. They are not a great nation. They are living under the protection of Egypt, who was the world power of that day. And the book closes by saying that Joseph is in a coffin in Egypt. So we have moved from life and flourishing at the beginning of Genesis to death in a coffin in Egypt. But Joseph makes a great statement of faith at the end of the book when he says, God will visit you here and he will bring you up just as he promised. So we, like Joseph, need to look forward in faith to see how God is going to fulfill all the promises he made in the book of Genesis. Next, we read the book of Job. Job is a long and difficult book about a subject that we all still have questions about today, and that is, why do good people suffer? The book opens with a kind of just a heavenly scene that is a little bit disturbing, because we see Satan comes and after God declares Job righteous, Satan asks for access to him, and God allows Satan to take away his family, his possessions, even his health, and Job is left in a place of deep suffering. 3 friends come to comfort Job. They come from 3 different parts of the ancient world, representing the best wisdom of the day. And for 7 days, they sit in silence. And that is the most comforting thing they do, because when they open their mouths, they only make Job's suffering worse. The friends have a very formulaic view of God, and they say if Job will just repent, then God will be obligated to restore him. The friends talk a lot about God, but not to God. But we see Job talking to God. He believes that all of his suffering, all of his questioning is safest laid at the feet of this God that he knows and worships. When Job and his friends are out of words, a 4th friend shows up in the story, and he shifts the arguments from Job and human suffering to the main character of the story, who is God, and where we find ultimate hope and certainty. Then in the final beautiful, majestic chapters of Job, God himself shows up and gives Job an audience that he has been asking for. And instead of God answering Job's questions, he calls Job up to answer his questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Were you there when I measured it out? Have you been to the storehouses of the snow? And through God's powerful and poetic questioning of Job, Job finally sees that the universe is run by a higher and greater wisdom than he will ever understand. He says, I have heard about God, but now I have seen him with my eyes. And he bows and responds as any true believer would, in humility and worship before God. All of Job's whys were answered in the great who of the universe. So in the end, God restores Job. Job was very different from the friends. The friends wanted what they could get from God, but Job wanted God. He was a true and righteous sufferer. God affirms Job's righteousness at the end and restores to him his family and possessions and honor. And it says that Job lived a full life. The book of Job tells us something really important about the universe. One, that it's run by a God who is much greater and wiser than we are. But 2, if there's no place for undeserved suffering in the universe, there's no room for unmerited grace. And Job points beautifully to Jesus. He is the most righteous sufferer. And he comes and he suffers in order that we can receive unmerited grace. So as I read the book of Job, there's a lot I don't understand, but I'm grateful that the universe is run by a God who is much wiser and much smarter and much more just than me, so that there is undeserved suffering, which makes room for unmerited grace for a sinner like me. So those are some quick recaps of Genesis and Job. I hope they help you. I hope you're getting into a good rhythm with your reading, and we will continue on next week with Exodus and the exciting story there of God rescuing his people from slavery.